This game could be game of the year. This is Black Myth Wukong, a new Souls-like game that takes place in ancient China and fully incorporates the Chinese mythology into the game. You play as son Wukong in an attempt to reclaim your power and be an angry little monkey who fights God. This game is one of the most visually stunning games I have played in a very long time. The graphics just look absolutely beautiful, and the game knows it too. Sometimes you have meditation spots where the game stops you and it's like, whoa, 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 hey, come check this out. Yeah, look at this. Our game's pretty, isn't it? Here's a skill point. Go on with your day. The basic mechanics in this game, like the combat, are also super interesting. The combat itself has a lot of gimmicks to it. The bosses have a unique look. The cutscenes all look phenomenal. Bottom line, this game lives up to the hype. And this is how my experience with the first 2 chapters went. Gonna do this video in 4 segments to break down the game a bit, with the first one being the actual story of the game. If I get anything wrong, which I probably will, feel free to correct me. I'm not well researched at all. This game, as you might have guessed, is based off the story of Sun Wukong, the monkey guy. The opening scene shows off the fight between the original version of Sun Wukong and the God of War, I think. But you fight this guy as an opener to the game because Wukong rejected the chance to join heaven, and Wukong eventually gets defeated. My fucking mountain! He loses 6 of his relics, and now you play as another monkey in the future who has to explore the realm to reclaim Wukong's 6 lost relics. And that brings us to the start of chapter 1. Chapter 1 is a big opening chapter, pretty much, that is meant to really teach you the game. But this area is the home of the Wind Temple and an antagonist ruling over it called the Bear. This chapter also includes ringing the bells to break a seal and venture to a secret version of the area that unlocks a new boss fight and ties back into the lore of the area. But moving on from that, we're now nearing the end of the first chapter, where we finally meet the man known as the Bear, who puts up a decent fight but runs away to the top of the mountain for a rematch. Chase him up there and you'll find out why he's called the Bear. Spoiler alert, he's a big fucking bear. Defeat him, and that is the end of chapter 1's story, as we finish with a beautiful cutscene and unlocking the first of the sage's relics. And now we move on to chapter 2. Chapter 2 starts with our monkey having been shot many times in the desert, only to be saved by a headless musician. In chapter 2, we battle our way through the rat fortress, dealing with the supposed rat king and his 2 sons. Find out who's been bossing around these rats. Big ass tiger. After the big ass tiger, we find the first of our tallies, which unlock different passages in the area. You continue on while approaching a massive sand tornado and fight through a golem, collecting another tally. And now, after exploring the area, we find all roads lead to this tornado. Enter and find the Wind Sage for the final boss of this area. Defeat the big rat. Find out that the head that he was lugging around was the head of the musician from earlier, who is the rightful ruler of this area. And with another crazy, well-animated cutscene, the chapter comes to an end. I'm only 2 chapters in this game, and the story is already really solid. Hopefully it's somewhat accurate to Wukong's actual story. I'm very interested in it, even though I know nothing of the mythology. Alright, that's enough about the story. Now we move on to the actual gameplay. As the player, you get to choose between some new cool armor sets to unlock and use that all grant different set bonuses, which is cool. And your staff has a relatively set upgrade path with new forms being unlocked as you progress. But the interesting part of the upgrade system is the absolutely massive skill tree. There is just so damn much to this skill tree. There's multiple different nodes and that branch from your initial skills, and some you can upgrade multiple times. This is also where we can unlock the stance system, which works a little bit similar to the stance system in Ghost of Tsushima, where you have different strengths and weaknesses in each stance. The 3 stances are Smash, which is strong for fast, consistent, close combat. The Pillar stance, which is good for playing defensive with more range and also grants the ability to dodge lower attacks. And the Thrust stance, which is crazy strong for ranged attacks and good for keeping distance with bosses that are a bit too aggressive for your own liking. The stances allow for a good bit of diversity in the combat, but if I'm being honest, I tend to like simply using the Thrust stance in a lot of situations. Moving on from the stances, there's also a really cool system with the transformations. Some transformations allow you to fully transform into whatever creature is selected and have a full new health bar for the new creature you become. And the first one you get, and the only one I found so far because I never ended up using guides, was the wolf transformation that you get from a boss, which is pretty early in the game, and it's already plenty strong, having its own unique talent, special move, and fire application. What else do you want? There's some smaller transformations called spirit guides, which only transform you for a split second to let off one attack based off of where you got the spirit guide from. For example, the one I use is from the Wandering Right, where I get a big head smash attack that seems to stagger most opponents. It's good enough for me. There's some other niche systems in the combat that you can find elsewhere, but I haven't played enough to experience that much. Combat basics in this game are really solid and interesting, but for sure don't do anything extraordinary. It's satisfying to use, yes, but it can become repetitive if you're playing for long stretches of time, and nothing crazy huge so far that stuck out to me. We made it finally, my favorite part of any game, the boss fights. This game has a lot of boss fights, with a mini boss like every 15 minutes or so, and multiple bosses per chapter. A lot of mini bosses are pretty solid, like the secret one from chapter 1, and the Serpent Man also from chapter 1. But there's also plenty that essentially feel like bigger versions of regular enemies, like the Tiger's Acolyte in chapter 2. The game can feel a bit oversaturated, with bosses making it feel a bit less special, but I truly enjoy fighting big enemies one-on-one. So it doesn't bother me that much, and there's still a good couple fights that really stick out. But I must say, the music in these fights is all pretty decent, but I have yet to find any soundtracks in this game that have actually engrossed me, which might not matter to some people, but really affects how I interpret a boss fight personally. And this is my review, so the game's losing a point. Now, let's talk about some of the cool bosses. First of all, the actual opening boss fight against the God of War is actually really cool, with an awesome arena, and you can't die, so you get the chance to learn the controls and some assorted abilities before going on to the actual game. Then we find our first boss in chapter 1, Guangji. Good opener boss with a status condition and some interesting moves, but very squishy, which makes it good for a first boss. Next boss I want to mention is the Serpent Man in chapter 1, which is our first boss with 2 full health bars. But it doesn't feel like too long of a fight. Decent moveset, but I wish it changed more when he went to second phase. Last boss I want to mention in chapter 1 is the Bear. I think the original fight before he goes into Black Bear form is much more entertaining from a gameplay standpoint, but the Black Bear form has a much cooler arena and visuals. And now on to chapter 2. The only bosses that really stuck out for me, honestly, was the Tiger and the Wind Sage. The Tiger is an easy fight, but I simply found it to be a fun fight with an unsettling start, with the fight being in a pool of blood. The Wind Sage fight is probably my favorite in the game so far, because I actually had a bit of trouble taking like 3 attempts to beat it. I like the moveset he has, and it's interesting how the game uses the Sand Tornado to actually distort your vision and let him set up attacks, which makes the fight way more engaging. The bosses in this game are good. A little bit tedious at times, but still very entertaining. I'm just hoping to become a little bit more difficult when I get further in the game. Seems like all the important stuff is out of the way now, but there's some more things I want to cover that don't really fit into the other categories. Like the cutscenes, for example. After every chapter in the game, we get a beautiful cutscene in a different kind of art style / animation style to show us the backstory of the area or just some lore on Chinese mythology and its stories. The chapter 1 story shows us what I'd imagine to be the bear's backstory, which I can't really interpret because I'm not too good at that kind of thing. Go watch a lore video if you really want to know. But I understood enough to see that it was based on the bear and his past. The second chapter's cutscene is what I imagine is an ancient story about a man who saves a fox in the mountains, and besides the interesting animation style, it seems to have some sort of deeper meaning to go along with it, as it has a twist ending to it. But these cutscenes are absolutely amazing, and I excitedly look forward to them at the end of every chapter now. I also want to point out that in both chapters I played, there was a couple of NPCs. It seems the game likes to have one main NPC that is with you the entire time, with the old man being the NPC for the first chapter and the headless musician to guiding you through the second chapter. I really like this concept because you actually get to know these characters and they seem to have some sort of connection to the overall plot of the area in the end. Now, there are other smaller NPCs, but they're more like merchants that help you by selling you things and upgrades, like the Drunk Monkey in chapter 1 and the Foxman in chapter 2. Last thing I want to talk about in this little section is the basic enemies of the game. They, for the most part, feel extremely fair and maybe even underpowered. A lot of the game, I just found myself mowing through hordes of enemies, which for one made me feel cool as hell, but it also led me into feeling the repetitive nature of the combat. But the enemies' designs themselves were certainly not the problem. There's quite a wide variety of enemies in this game, especially in chapter 2. You'll find everything from 2-headed rat warriors to giant skeleton horsemen. There is also plenty of range enemies, but they're never really too much of an issue because you're given a block in your kit specifically for blocking projectiles, so it never really is a problem. So the enemies are done very well in this game, I think. They for sure lean towards the easier side of things, but honestly, I'd prefer the enemies to be easier than tedious and annoying. Now that I've finished all my yapping about the aspects of the game, it all leads us back to the original question. Does Black Myth Wukong live up to its hype? And my statement remains unchanged from the beginning of the video, but with a couple more notes now. I think this game is great and stands very well on its own, but I can see it being problematic for other people's tastes. I fear some people may find that there's nothing really special in the gameplay and it would feel more like a boss rush than anything else. My own personal problem with the game is that it feels almost too easy for a game with the Souls-like tag. It simply isn't punishing enough in my opinion, so I don't get huge bursts of satisfaction from beating my head against a wall on a boss, but that also leads the game to being much more accessible to a wider variety of people. and potentially lead more people into trying the Souls-like genre. The game is absolutely amazing, and I for sure think it's worth the buy, or at least wait for a sale to pick it up and try. This is all just my opinion though, and I do see a lot of people arguing the fact of whether or not the game should actually classify as a Souls-like, and I think that feels enough like the other games I've played to be put in the category. But that's all for me in this video. If you stayed to the end, I appreciate you. Let me know if there's any other games you want me to talk about, but that's all for now, so bye-bye.